Welcome back to Askewed Reviews. And as I'm continuing to do so throughout the year, I'm going through the entire Disney animated collection. So today we are doing the 1941 film Dumbo. Here is your trivia question for today. What is Dumbo's real name? The answer will be at the end of this episode. So at the beginning of our film, we see a bunch of storks that are about to deliver a bunch of babies to Florida, more specifically, a bunch of baby animals down to a circus in Florida. For the most part, most of the animals are getting babies, except for Mrs. Jumbo, who is expecting. But the very next day, when all of the animals are piled onto the train, that's when Mr. Stork finally arrives to give Mrs. Jumbo her own baby. Now, this newborn happens to be just a little bit different, as he has gigantic ears. Now, unfortunately, Dumbo's fellow elephants on the train happen to be a bunch of gossipy bitches, who absolutely are terrible and start making fun of his ears. What's worse is it doesn't even stop there. Even the patrons at the circus are making fun of him, and when they try to bring him into the act, he ends up screwing it up, unfortunately. So now he's been regulated to being considered just a joke, so they put him in with the clowns, who also end up treating him like garbage. So, with Dumbo's only true friends being his mother and Timothy the Mouse, will he ever find happiness and ever find out why he has such big ears? So, originally, Walt Disney did not have any interest in making Dumbo into a full film. In fact, it was only due to Joe Grant and Dick Humer, who would write up installments of the film and leave them on Walt's desk every morning, that it actually got made, because finally, Walt actually ran into the story department saying, "This is great! What happens next?" Walt Disney was really hoping that it would be successful due to the fact that surprisingly, Pinocchio and Fantasia were both financially failures. But this film ended up grossing 2.5 million, which was way more than the other two made. Also, if you weren't aware, Dumbo was actually the first Disney movie to be released on video cassette in 1981. The movie is actually based off of an original story, but not based off of a traditional one, in the sense that it wasn't actually a storybook, as it was something called a roll-a-book, which was a device that had these rolling pins, and you would have the story move along as you move the pins. The character of Timothy the Mouse was not actually in the original story. He was a replacement for the character of the Red Robin that was Dumbo's friend in the story. Another thing that's different from the movie is it's not actually the crows that teach Dumbo how to fly. In the story, it's actually an owl named Professor Hoot. One last difference between the story and the movie is in the original story, Dumbo's mother is not named Mrs. Jumbo, but in fact is Mother Ella. The reason why they changed it to Mrs. Jumbo in the movie is at the time, the circus, Barnum and Bailey's, actually had a very well known elephant named Jumbo. Originally, there was a plan to have Dickie Jones, who was the voice of Pinocchio, also do the voice of Dumbo, but in the end they decided it would be best if Dumbo was a silent character. This movie would be the first of many Disney appearances by Sterling Holloway and Verna Felton, who would do a lot of voices over the years, including Mr. Stork in this film and the Elephant Matriarch. During the production of this film, there was actually a long and bitter animator strike. Half of the studio staff actually walked out, and some of the strikers are actually caricatured as some of the clowns that appear in the film, specifically the ones that talk about needing to get a raise from their boss. Whether or not you're aware, apparently the ringmaster in this movie is considered the villain, as he actually shows up as a Disney villain in some other video games and media. The name of the circus can be seen as WDP Circus, which actually stands for Walt Disney Productions Circus. There was actually plans of putting Dumbo on the front of Time magazine, but unfortunately, right at that same time, the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred, and of course, that took front and center. Did you happen to know that there actually is a reference to the 1922 film Nosferatu in this one? At one point, you can see Timothy creeping up on the ringmaster, and his shadow is looming over him, which is supposed to be a nod towards that film. Now, I can't talk about Dumbo without also mentioning the pink elephant scene. To this day, this is still one of my favorite moments in Disney animation. Although I do have to say, I wouldn't really relate this to being drunk, as Dumbo and Timothy more than likely were on acid or at the very least absinthe. There was actually talks of doing a straight to video Dumbo 2 in the early 2000s. the story would have involved Dumbo and a group of young circus animals getting separated from the circus and trying to find their way back. There's an interesting Disney theory out there that apparently the character of the Red Robin from the original story was not originally going to become Timothy the Mouse, but was in fact going to become Jiminy Cricket. Apparently, the reason that that didn't happen is because they wanted to go with the whole funny idea of elephants being afraid of mice. And of course, here's one of my favorite segments: the dark side of Disney. They never actually give the crows names in the movie, but apparently the leader was actually going to be called Jim Crow, which is in very poor taste due to the fact that the character Jim Crow was normally played by white people wearing blackface, and they would look ridiculous, act stupid, and wear terribly ragged clothing. Now, over the years, officially the main crow has been given the name Dandy Crow instead of Jim. Now, there also is some controversy as to whether or not the crow characters are actually racist in the film. There is obviously that connection to Jim Crow, which does cause an issue, but at the same time, all of the crows were voiced by black actors, and if you look at it from an outside perspective, of the characters that appear in the film, they're actually some of the most intelligent, nicest, and most accepting characters throughout the film. So when it comes to the film Dumbo, I do still enjoy this movie, but I don't think it exactly stands the test of time. The story itself isn't that interesting, but I will say some things I do enjoy about it are the art style, and of course some of the sequences like the pink elephants, and of course the music in the film as well. So I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5. And if you do really enjoy Dumbo, you can always check out the live action film that Disney also did, which is directed by Tim Burton, but I haven't seen it yet personally, and I haven't heard really good things, unfortunately. Now, one thing I can actually speak on from personal experience is when I was a child going to the Disney theme parks, I really did enjoy riding Dumbo the Flying Elephant. Now, as for the trivia question from the beginning of this episode, what is Dumbo's real name? So, at least in this film, Dumbo's original name was Jumbo Jr., named by his mother, and it was only because of those terrible other elephants that he got the nickname Dumbo. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Askewed Reviews, and if there's a movie you'd like to see get a review, just mention it in the comments.